one of the ways that colonial hegemony operates is also through the manipulation of fears and needs and the weaponization of vulnerability. So it cultivates specific fears and then extracts value from the responses for these fears that are predictable. It's a sort of fear economy in a way. We often see in the global south fears of poverty, scarcity, violence, punishment that makes global south people fall into certain patterns of either people pleasing, compliance, self-neglect, which are behaviors that affirm the very systems that cause the harm, and we get stuck in the cycles of trauma. And for those sitting in more privileged positions, there is often this toxic need for validation and upward mobility that requires this strategic use of their global south identities to kind of climb up either global north ladders or this seek for well-compensated roles that allow them to feel this sense of false belonging, safety, recognition. So how do you see colonial hegemony manipulating this vulnerability in global south contexts, and what fears do you see getting triggered and what compensatory behaviors tend to follow them?
When I heard you say economy of fear, the first thought in my mind was Monsters Inc. Do you remember that they literally have their energy source is the fear of children that they break into the rooms of in the middle of the night and like harvest the screams of the children. And this for me, it's like I am so interested at Pixar what their like idea was in bringing this kind of story to the theaters, because is this some kind of commentary essentially on extractive capitalism? Because the end of the movie, of course, like the monsters realize essentially that you can get far more energy out of laughter. And so it switches over into this different economy essentially. Or maybe a similar structure of economy, but that's based on a different resource that it's using to create energy or to energize the economy. So it got me thinking about your questions around like there's something that we need to energize the economy, and that is the reason why we have to use these mechanisms to induce this fear. And the economy is structured in this way, and it's very difficult to change the structure. And so this is just kind of the way that it has to be, and everything else is just collateral damage. Everything else, like trauma, like the intergenerational aspects of it, like the cultural aspects of it, that's all just collateral damage. Doesn't matter anyway to the power structures because these things are not something that they have to deal with. These things are happening in concentration camps in the colonies that are far away from where the ruling elite actually live, where they make decisions, where they feel, different aspects of what it means to be privileged. And so in the case of, for example, like fears around insecurities, etc. That is insecurity is how the same mechanism breeds fear, especially in the global north, because the global north and modern Western civilization breeds this identity-based complex. And so they can only control you by instilling in you this fear around insecurity, around especially your identity. So this is where identity politics comes in, and I don't necessarily see this as some kind of like new mechanism. I see this as the same mechanism as divide and conquer, which is simply that modern Western civilization promotes individualism over collectivism, and so therefore identity politics is simply the mode by which you can most easily practice divide and conquer, a colonial mechanism to control populations. So these are just different contexts within which there are different mechanisms through which this same system of like this economy is being powered by fears. There's many other things that I could say about how fears are manifesting in the global south, because I think there's also a certain paranoia that is rooted not in fantasy, but in reality, right? A paranoia
Mhm.
over what you see happening to other people, and then that could fall to you. And this paranoia exists because there are no systems to attenuate the fears. So, for example, why don't governments in the global south act in ways that actually benefit the global south? And so this is one of those things. For example, there is no social safety net. If you lose your job, for example, you're on your own. You have to rely on family structures to be able to tide you over. So why is that? Right? And so this is because the system of fears has a complementary system of neglect that also
Absolutely.
that it also extracts, that also denies, right? And this is a way to attack collectivist identity in the global south. So this wouldn't necessarily work in the global north, for example, or it wouldn't have that much effect.
Mm-hmm.
But that is coming to fore as well in the global north because the global north themselves are increasingly becoming colonized as well as the ruling elite become more and more concentrated into these sort of like smaller and smaller, richer and richer families, essentially. So I think we have to see this economy of fears as acting in different ways in different contexts related to how to best leverage, basically, and extract. At the same time, there is a context of profiteering on the other side that we need to consider because that is the structure that feeds these elites. And the elites are the ones who decide how these structures are, number one, which is hard to change, but number two, where they get their resources to feed that structure from.
Yeah, I think this you put this in a way that makes a lot of sense around how these mechanisms of control and compliance act together with these mechanisms of neglect, and then it's kind of you are constantly having to choose the least worst option. And of course, that trigger a lot of responses in the manipulation of the unmet needs and the fears and the insecurities, etc. That is very terrible when you think about all of that. And this happens in purpose, like it's not random. There are a series of mechanisms behind this. And I think in an individual level, being aware of how these mechanisms are playing out or how your fears are getting triggered is really important to get out of that cycle of reaction, and then you do exactly what is expected from you, that is this compliance. So I think understanding what are the needs behind the fears and what are some options maybe available for you to meet those needs in healthier ways brings some clarity, because I see a lot of needs being met through the sense of false correspondence. So like if you are people pleasing to make people like you because you have which is a basic human need for belonging and for recognition, okay, what is a healthy manifestation of that? Because if you are people pleasing, you are pretending to be someone you are not, and so therefore this belonging is false. If you are seeking some job that will pay you well because you have this need for stability or safety, is that really true when planetary systems collapses in the background? Like it's false. So how can we ditch these illusions about the ways we are trying to meet our needs, that it's like this fear triggered responses that make us act in a way that kind of protect and act in ways that actually enhance the cycles of harm. So I think we need to kind of pay attention to that and ditch those illusions and start questioning why are we acting in certain ways? Like, can I stop for a moment and analyze this kind of what is happening inside, what is triggering, what is would be a healthier way to respond to actually meet those needs and not just pretend that you are meeting them.
Yeah, I agree. I think the fear, systems of fear and systems of neglect need to also be seen alongside what happens when you kind of wise up to those two dynamics happening. And then you actually go and start to look for something that can help you genuinely like address that. And then what you run
Mm-hmm.
into is systems of sabotage. That's what is waiting for you when you get to that place. which is, for example, you look for treatment at a psychologist or to look for some kind of therapy, right? And the reality is that those systems, especially from Western traditions or conventions of mental health, are based upon structural gaslighting, based upon narratives that tell you you're not managing your mental health well. That is the reason why you are experiencing all of these things. Essentially, it's your fault that you're not strong enough, but you don't worry because we can help you. We have methodologies that are tried and tested. We have medicines. We have injectables. We have all sorts of treatments that can help you with fears that you are experiencing that nobody else is experiencing because nobody wants to talk about, what makes them embarrassed about their own lives because we live in a world of insecurity that is already targeting all of your anxieties. So this is what I mean by we run into this whole system of sabotage that is set up for us for when we actually get beyond that barrier to start to want to seek help. And then we access these Western modes of help that are simply there to kick us when we're down, literally. Whether it's from a psychiatrist or from the hospital, like the actual like profession of medicine in the global south, which is sanctioned by the West, all of these aspects of like trying to help ourselves are blocked off through these systems of sabotage. And so I don't think it's any surprise that as people experience these things and they wise up to that, two things happen. The first is that they realize, they start to understand where their anxiety actually comes from. Because they start to see that no matter where I go, I'm up against the same beast. These are all different elements of a system of control that doesn't want me to be healthy, that doesn't want me to be prosperous, that is holding me down into this place where I can't do anything. I just have to lie down and accept it. And then the second thing that happens is you start to want to know, what is this about? Who created this? Is there any way that I can actually get out? And to some extent, you have to kind of go through those thoughts or those experiences in order to end up in a place where you're just ready to kind of like give up. You're ready to give up the lifestyle that modern Western civilization has convinced you that you need to have in order to be happy. And you need to instead define happiness on your own terms in ways that you can actually achieve. So this is where I think we start to get to real health. This is where we start to talk about decolonization. We start to talk about opting out of modern Western civilization. We start to talk about looking at systems that are more based upon sovereignty, upon your own limits, upon the availability of resources around you, which in the global south is abundant. And you start to see things in a different light. And this is where we can actually start to find that we have thoughts apart from fear. It's possible to have thoughts outside of your anxiety complex. It's possible to not be depressed. It's not you who is born depressed. It is the environment within which you are allowed or not allowed to express yourself, to grow, to become something that you want to be.
Yeah, I totally agree with what you just said. I think choosing pathways of real health and not just fake so magical solutions that are offered to us that could be way easier and way less like time consuming, but that feeds the cycles of harm. And when you start seeing that, it's like creating a space for yourself and thinking about the choices you make to understand what you need and what is health for you. And that sometimes is really hard when in global south contexts we are immersed in a context where a lot of people are brainwashed to kind of serve the system, and this is what help means, and
Right, like
etc.
climbing the ladder, right? Like whether it's the career or the property ladder or the wealth ladder, whatever that is, like there's this idea that is like when you're born, you're like given this pill saying like you have to climb this ladder because like generations upon generations, we are climbing this ladder.
Yeah, and it is, there is something around, I just want your well-being, I just want you to succeed, I just want you to be happy, but it's not real. Like, I think this questioning, the started questioning this is so important to be able to really understand what are the choices that you need to make to feel fulfilled, to feel really happy and not stuck in this definition of happiness or success that was set for you, and just accept it, because I think at least what I see in the context that's been embedded in the global south, people are super stressed, they are burnt out, they are not, this pathway is not offering really health. So I think this is something we can see quite easily around us. So
That's the thing. We can see it with our own eyes, we can feel it with our own hearts, but we still go around succumbing to the system that is literally trying to kill us.
yeah, and this I think also relates to another conversation we had around the Stockholm syndrome in the
Yeah,
global south.
absolutely.